Washington launches program to allow Americans to sponsor refugees in the U.S. Harvard reverses decision not to allow Israel Critic to be a fellow. UN chief accuses big oil companies of pushing big lie on climate change. Peel police say no charges laid after video showed Muslim student being attacked at a school. 4 soldiers and 4 terrorists killed in Southwestern Pakistan. Indian monk who raped 120 women sentenced to 14 years in jail. From Toronto studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Saamiyah Syed. Our top story tonight: the United States has launched a pilot program Thursday to allow Americans to sponsor the resettlement of refugees. The State Department said the Welcome Corps program empowers Americans to help refugees arriving through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program with integration. Julietta Valls-Noyes is Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. She told reporters that welcoming refugees reflects the values of the country. She said the goal this year is to mobilize 10,000 Americans to step forward as private sponsors and help resettle at least 5,000 refugees. The program will have 2 phases. In the first, private sponsors will be matched with refugees. In the second, sponsors can identify and refer refugees for resettlement and support. Human rights and free speech advocates on Thursday said Harvard made the right decision after a dean reversed his opposition to a fellowship for the longtime human rights campaigner. Dean Douglas Elmendorf, head of the Kennedy School, had earlier refused to support Kenneth Roth's 1-year fellowship and was met with condemnation. Roth, free speech advocacy groups, and more than 1,000 students, faculty, and alumni accused the dean of retaliating for Roth's criticism of Israel's anti-Palestinian policies. Elmendorf told colleagues that he was concerned about the analysis by Human Rights Watch. The international group was led by Roth for 3 decades until his retirement last year. Human Rights Watch and other groups, including the Israel-based B'Tselem and United Nations, have concluded through investigations that Israel is imposing apartheid on Palestinians for decades. The Institute of Medieval and Post-Medieval Studies partnered with the University of Texas at Dallas for an exhibition celebrating the immense contributions of Muslim scholars and scientists throughout history. The Medieval Marvels exhibit ran from November 14th to January 15th at the university's Eugene McDermott Library. It featured medieval figures who had a profound impact on the fields of science, mathematics, humanities, and philosophy. Institute board member Aziz Budri offered insight into scholars featured in the exhibition. He said the group has been trying to introduce the scholars to Muslims and non-Muslims. Budri said many people, including Muslim college students, believe everything invented in the past 200 years was by the West. He added that other civilizations laid the foundation of what we have today. A federal appeals court ruled on Tuesday that a Virginia jail must defend its practice of broadcasting Christian services on TV screens each Sunday. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit undid part of a ruling against David Nighthorse Firewalker Fields. Firewalker Fields, a Muslim and former inmate at Middle River Regional Jail, claims the weekly broadcasts unconstitutionally favored Christianity. He spent 3 months at the jail. Judge Julius N. Richardson, writing for the court, said inmates could only avoid the broadcasts in common areas if they retreated to their cells. He said that could be seen as an ultimatum: be Christian or be penalized. The lawsuit offered historical sources to back up its claim that the broadcast violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Richardson said the clause generally bans the government from playing favorites with religion. The United Nations top official has accused big oil companies of pushing a big lie on climate change. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said they rode roughshod over their own science, speaking Wednesday at the World Economic Forum Summit in Davos, Switzerland. Guterres said fossil fuel producers and their enablers are still racing to expand production, knowing their business model is inconsistent with human survival. He said the world was flirting with climate disaster, with greenhouse gas emissions at record levels. Guterres warned that the commitment made in the 2016 Paris Accord to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius is going up in smoke. The world is headed for an increase of 2.8 degrees Celsius, and he noted that the consequences will be devastating. Several parts of the planet will become uninhabitable, he added. A story on 4 soldiers and 4 terrorists killed in Pakistan comes with details after the break, so stay tuned and we will be right back. Welcome back. 4 Pakistani soldiers and as many terrorists were killed in 2 separate incidents in the southwestern Balochistan province, the Pakistani army said Wednesday. The Inter-Services Public Relations, the media wing of the Pakistan Army, said terrorists attacked security personnel from across the Pakistan-Iran border in the Panjgur district. The terrorists targeted a convoy of security forces patrolling the border, the media agency said. Iranian authorities have been asked to hunt down the perpetrator, it added. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, which came a day after Pakistan's Army Chief General Asim Munir visited Balochistan's Khuzdar and Basima areas. The Army chief emphasized maintaining optimum operational readiness to thwart any attempts by foreign-sponsored and supported hostile elements. Earlier, the Pakistani military said at least 4 terrorists were killed during an intelligence-based operation in the southwestern Balochistan province. A leading Bangladeshi publisher known for its works by dissident writers said Thursday that it had been banned from the country's leading book fair. It is the latest example of the government's clampdown on its critics. The Ikushi Book Fair is organized by the Bangla Academy, the government's state-run literacy agency. Leading Bengali writers gather in the capital Dhaka each February to discuss their works. Millions of dollars worth of books are sold at the month-long festival. Publishing house Adarsha's chief executive Mahabuba Rahman said its titles critical of the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government triggered censors. Festival organizers told Rahman that 3 of the books Adarsha published contained criticism of the government ruling party and its student wing. A Bangla Academy official said some of Adarsha's books were against the policy of the Academy. Leading authors and Bangladeshi academics lent their support to the publishing house on social media. At least 1 person reportedly belonging to a separatist group was killed and several others injured in a gun battle between 2 armed militant forces inside Burma. The clash occurred along the border with Bangladesh Wednesday, local sources said. The fighting took place near no man's land at Gundum Tumbru frontline in Bangladesh's southeastern border district of Bandarban. Nearly 5,000 persecuted Rohingya refugees have been there, living in makeshift tents here for nearly 6 years after fleeing a military genocide in August 2017. Jahangir Aziz, chairman of the Gundum Union Council in Bandarban, told Anadolu that dozens of Rohingya tents have been burned down. Aziz said the Rohingya Solidarity Organization and the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army are reportedly locked in the fighting. A video circulated on social media showing a hijab-wearing student being attacked at a Mississauga school in Canada has prompted a police investigation. The incident occurred on December 19th at the Woodland Secondary School. A Peel Regional Police spokesperson told online news outlet Narcity that they have completed their investigation. Police say no criminal charges have been filed and that there is no indication this incident is racially motivated. They noted that the victim did not come forward and the incident was reported by school administration on December 20th. On January 17th, a letter from the school was sent to families reminding people that Islamophobia is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Jailed Kashmiri rights activist Khurram Parvez has won the Martin Ennals Award. It is one of the world's most prestigious human rights prizes. Two other campaigners from Chad and Venezuela were also hailed for their courage. They are Delphine de Raby, one of Chad's first women lawyers, and Feliciano Reina, a rights activist and healthcare access advocate. Prize jury chairman Hans Taholin commended the 2023 laureates' courage, passion, and determination to bring the voices of the voiceless to the international arena. That's despite the ongoing, sometimes life-threatening challenges they endure, he added. The award ceremony will take place on February 16th in Geneva. Each laureate will receive between $22,000 and $33,000. Indian monk Mahant Bilu was sentenced to 14 years in prison for raping more than 120 women in the state of Haryana. The 63-year-old also made video clips of the act and used them to extort money and sex from victims. The monk claimed to possess powers enabling him to hypnotize and help people. He was a follower of the tantric practice, a Hindu who exercises sexuality in a ritualized or yogic context. Coming up after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we will be right back. Welcome back. It's time for our in-depth analysis segment. Let's watch.
What is going on with the drug prices? Drug makers are raising prices of at least 350 prescription drugs this month. America is on drugs, that's prescription drugs. 62% of adults take at least one prescription medicine daily, and 25% of America takes four or more. Why these consumers are not becoming a power? We have Tahir Amin with us. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Tahir Amin is founder and executive director of I-MAK, a not-for-profit working to address structural inequalities in how medicine is developed and distributed. So tell us why these prices are going up and why people are not up in arm about it.
It seems to be an annual event that the drug companies increase their prices. I think the only time in the last few years where they may not have done that was when COVID started. I think that was probably 2021 was the year that they may not have raised their prices. But this is an annual event, and they will point to inflation. They will point to rebate companies charging more, and so that will justify the increase in list prices. But there's a lot more at play here when you look at how the pharmaceutical industry works. If you look at some of the top-selling drugs over the last decade, something like Humira, AbbVie, for example, once its main patents had started to expire, had filed a number of other patents, which is what gives them the exclusivity. Only they can sell the drug. They increased their prices by double, and that's where they make most of their profits. So there's a number of mechanics that go into why the pharmaceutical industry can keep raising the prices on these drugs for a lot longer. One is the patent system, which is what rewards the pharmaceutical companies for the discovery of a drug, and that's supposed to be a limited time of exclusivity. But what they do is they use that to extend out their profit-making capabilities by extending patents, by doing little tweaks and changes. So this is how the industry has gained so much power over the years, and why they're able to increase the prices at will. Now, what we will see this year is the Inflation Reduction Act, which was brought in by President Biden. Now, that will only affect 10 drugs starting in 2026, which the government will start to look at which of those 10 drugs it will start to do negotiations on. That could have some impact on drugs for people who receive them on Medicare, but that's only going to be 10 drugs, and we don't know what the price reduction is going to be. So the drug companies are now looking at that coming down the road, and they're going to start trying to use other pressure points to increase prices and trying to sort of derail the government's efforts to lower drug prices.
Now, considering that 62% of Americans take at least one drug and 25% take 4 or more drugs, why there is no consumer outrage on these things? How drug companies are able to do whatever they want to do seems almost at whim, while there is not much resistance.
I think if you look across in the last 6-7 years, there's been a growing concern about drug pricing in the United States. I think what happens is in Congress, there's a lot of lobbying that goes on. The pharmaceutical industry has probably outspent itself over the last year in lobbying, particularly given the passing of the Inflation Reduction Act. Anytime there's any attempt to try and take some action on drug pricing by Congress, the industry really does come in hard to try and prevent that from happening. In terms of the consumers themselves, unfortunately, a lot of consumers, the system is so complex that they can't see how do you even fix it. And I think there's also a cultural aspect to this in the United States. I'm from the United Kingdom, so I understand what it's like to have a system where that the government actually negotiates prices on drugs to keep it at a reasonable price. Whereas the UK has its own problems, but in the United States it's a free market. It's only until now with the Inflation Reduction Act that the government even can actually start to negotiate, and we don't know what that negotiation is going to look like. So the United States is, in a way, it's an outlier when it comes to health systems and drug pricing, because the US prides itself on being a free market. What that means is that the companies can actually charge whatever price they want, and there is a cultural aspect to the United States where people feel, well, we want the freedom of choice to take whatever drugs we want, whereas in more systems where the government actually negotiates prices, they might not take certain drugs, or they might not be able to access certain drugs. So there's kind of a freedom aspect to the United States when it comes to drugs, and why consumers don't push back so hard. The other thing is it's an insurance-based system. So technically, as long as you're employed and your employer is paying for your insurance, you don't really see that cost so much. I mean, there are some out-of-pocket costs, but if you're uninsured and you don't have that safety net, then that's when it becomes a real issue. And there's some pretty stark statistics out there, some of which you've already mentioned. So I think consumers are beginning to see the problem, but I think what it is, they're looking at representatives on the Hill to really do something about it. And unfortunately, I feel this current administration is trying to take some initial steps. But overall, if you look at it historically, politically, the Congress has been very weak in tackling the drug industry.
Free market, yes, but a whole lot of public funding goes in their directions. Isn't that accurate statement?
Well, I think the free market argument is a myth, and anybody who knows economics and knows how the drug industry works and knows how any other industry works, that the idea that there is a free market is preposterous. There's no such thing as a free market. A lot of industries are actually subsidized by the government. Even the likes of Apple. Actually, a lot of the technologies that went into many of the things we see in our devices come from US government sort of enterprises and research. And certainly that's the case with pharmaceutical drugs. There's a significant amount of initial investment that goes into the discovery of what we call the initial science that becomes then the bedrock of many of these drugs. But what the pharmaceutical companies do, and this is why I point to the patent system, is that once they get hold of that sort of exclusivity or the license from the NIH, for example, the National Institutes of Health, that often funds a lot of these initial discoveries, these drugs, then they go out and then they get all these other patents to try and extend their protection. And in some cases, instead of a drug coming off, becoming sort of generic, or the biosimilar version, which is for biologic drugs, becoming available after sort of having competition after sort of 10 years, after the patent expires. It should be you get 20 years for a patent, and then usually it's 10 years of marketing, 11 years of marketing exclusivity. But they are able to extend it for sort of beyond sort of 15, 16, 17, or sometimes 20 years. And what that means is more cost to the consumer, no competition. And when you think about the concept of a free market, the free market is supposed to be competitive. It isn't. It's actually a monopolistic system we have in the United States. And unfortunately, that's also affecting many countries around the world, because the United States is a net exporter of this kind of model. This is the kind of system that the pharmaceutical companies want, not only in the United States, but in every other country around the world, because that only enhances its profits. So the idea that we have a free market is a myth, but the idea that government subsidizes all these drugs really doesn't really hit home to people. It hit home a little bit during COVID, when all these vaccines were actually developed by a lot with government money. But people still feel that we need the private sector, and we do, to do some of this work. But the thing is, actually, should they be able to take taxpayers' money and then sort of benefit from these egregious profits that they make when they sell these drugs?
In the United States, when people discuss healthcare system, they refer to many European countries and Canada. Well, you being in the United Kingdom, are there people who refer to the US as this is a model which we need to have?
Yeah, they do. And the UK is going through this at the very minute. We have a serious problem here in the United Kingdom, where the National Health Service, which is the kind of crown jewel of the United Kingdom when it comes to health, when it comes to sort of having systems, is rotting away. The current Conservative government, which is the Tory party, has totally disinvested from the NHS as it's been in power. And now they're looking for trade agreements, and one of those is with the United States, and they're looking to privatize a lot of the healthcare system. And so they feel that the United States is this model for some kind of affordable healthcare system and a better healthcare system. And it's actually, having lived in both countries for a significant amount of time, I cannot believe that most Americans and British people would see that as a model. I think to a lot of British people's credit, they do know how important the NHS and how important it is to have a government that negotiates its drug prices, which it currently does. So I don't think the British public is totally deluded by that. But there's this thing, though, that the US believes that this is the best system for everyone. When really, when you think about 34 million people in the United States know somebody who has actually, when 34 million people can't even fill their prescriptions in the United States, that's a catastrophic figure for the richest country in the world. But unfortunately, the sway of the United States and the pharmaceutical lobbying system around the world is very persuasive. And when you have trade deals, and even when you see what's happening in countries like India, where the pharmaceutical industry now has slowly started to whittle away and take over a lot of the domestic industry. And same in Pakistan as well. I've worked globally around the world on these issues. And the United States has a huge influence because of the pressure from the pharmaceutical industry to try and get the systems that they want. And when really it's the worst of a kind.
Are there some drug companies, Tahir, who are trying to defy the normal maximizing values for shareholder, and instead of care for their social responsibility? Are there some drug companies who are different in nature?
I wish I could say there was, but there aren't any obvious ones, not in the commercial sense. There are some non-for-profit type drug companies that are starting to try and tackle these issues, but they're very few in between. Where there are companies who are trying to do something a little bit different, it's either because they are they're getting some either government funding, and they're trying to take on a different sort of business model. But really, in the commercial sector, the way our system is set up, there isn't really a incentive to work any other way. Unfortunately, the so-called free market in quote system, the sort of neoliberal system that has actually infected the pharmaceutical industry since the early 80s, because all it's about is actually maximizing shareholder profit. It's very little about this idea that, we're going to get better drugs, newer drugs. We will hear a lot about innovation It's actually, that's a lie. Pharmaceutical companies have become adept at tweaking existing drugs and then passing it off as some major path-breaking science so that they can roll out a slightly different version of a drug, or even actually claim that they invented something when really it was government funding, as you said before, that has done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of research costs. So there is an unfortunate, and I think the reason why we don't have any alternative models is because the industry will do everything to prevent alternative sort of systems or alternative incentive systems from existing, because they like this one. They know how to play it. They know how to game it. And I think it's the government's job to try and really think outside the box, to really try and sort of rein some of these practices in, whether it be the patent system, whether it be what they do at the FDA to try and get longer exclusivities. These are all incentive systems that the government has supplied the industry to try and help benefit the public. But now they're sort of, they got carried away with themselves.
Well, thank you so much, Tahir Amin, for your time.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you. Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Toronto studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.